friends. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm Mr. Forest. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I have a conversation with B.J. Miller. He is a physician who works in the areas of serious illness and end-of-life issues and death, hospice. He is someone I met down in southern Utah through mutual friends, and we have many mutual interests, so I'm always so overjoyed when I get a chance just to spend some time with someone and dive in. But he's given over 100 talks nationally, internationally on themes of serious illness and dying, 100 plus media interviews. I heard him talking to Oprah, to Sam Harris not too long ago, and he's got a great TED Talk called What Really Matters at the End of Life, as well as a book titled A Beginner's Guide to the End, Practical Advice for Living Life and Facing Death, that was out in 2019. So a really, really beautiful and meaningful conversation that I know you're going to love and appreciate. And we're going to get right into that. I don't have a lot else to be giving you something to keep an eye out for, nothing this month or next month, except that the Esalen Retreat, I believe, the signups will go live for that sometime in January. And we'll let you know on social media or the newsletter when that's available to sign up for. And just thanks again to everyone on our council on Patreon. That's patreon.com/eastforest. It's a great way to support this podcast or support the East Forest Project in general. And I'm so grateful to everyone over there who does that. So check it out if you get a chance, eastforest.org or patreon.com/eastforest. How's that for short and sweet? No, because I want to get into this. This was a great conversation, and BJ's someone that feels like a brother from another mother, and so we're going to dive into it right now with our new friend BJ Miller. Get to know you at all very well, and so this is one of the gifts of the podcast for me, is like just taking time to be with someone. So thank you.
Yeah. Amen, man. It's very nice to be with you, and thanks for your patience. It took us a while to set this up, but I'm really glad we got here.
Yeah. Sometimes the good things you got to wait for a little bit. So I want to dive in because your work and your life's work has a lot to do with a subject that I, to be honest, think about a lot, and that's death and dying, which there was this great phrase, it might have been Eckhart Tolle, I'm not sure, talking about birth and death being polarities, with life as the thing that's ever present in it. So I'm not sure if I'm always thinking about death or if I'm always thinking about life or living or just meaning, certainly all of the above. But the first thing I just want to say to you is that I often feel that death is this great primary motivator in everything we do, for all of us, probably largely unconscious for a lot of us, but I'm sure if we stop and think about it, we're like, yeah, I mean, that's the thing that motivates everything we do. And for some of us, that might be a deep interest in Monday Night Football, and for some of us, that might be pushing our life into service or taking crazy risks. But regardless, it seems like being more in right relationship with that makes sense. And for someone who is so steeped in death and being around dying, thinking about it very thoughtfully and working in it, what do you think are some of the things maybe we're missing, or that would help us bring ourselves more into right relationship with death?
Well, man, you just said such an important thing in that lead up, which, you're not, am I thinking about death? Am I thinking about life? Am I thinking about meaning making, finding meaning? That you just spoke right to my heart, brain, my organs. I'm myself in the same way. It's always funny for me to hear that I work around death, because the feeling is that I'm just really interested in life, and I really want to love reality, whatever the heck that is. And as far as I can tell, reality includes death. So ipso facto, I'm interested in death. And and this sort of reintegration of all these bits and pieces. And like you said, it's so beautifully, whether that's meted out Monday night, a love of Monday night football or work or whatever it is less important within, some moral framework. I don't, I just want to care. I want everyone to care. I want people to love. I want to love. And as far as I can tell, love is so awesome is that it doesn't kick anything out of the picture, even death. There's like this great Rilke quote, like I'm not like it's a paraphrase, but he wrote something like, I'm not suggesting that you love death, but I am suggesting that you love life so completely without picking and choosing that you automatically rope or fold death into that love. For me, that's just it. So anyway, I don't think I've answered your question, but let's get there. But that is a way in. That's what's so great about this stuff. Nothing is excluded, and that's sort of, especially these days with divisions everywhere. Any force for integrating across these divisions is a beautiful thing, and death does a really good job at that. So.
Yeah, it's it's a guaranteed satisfaction of your money back. I mean, when it happens, I'm sure there's not much negotiation. But you're kind of hearing you say about like by facing death in the face, in a sense, by dying you become more alive in a way. Mm-hmm. Isn't there a tradition? I'm not sure which one where you wear a death shroud. It's something you will be buried with, but you wear it every day. As a way, it's not some kind of punishment. I'm assuming that's a way of reminding yourself of the preciousness of this. And I'm hearing echoes of that in what you're saying, perhaps.
Yeah, amen. I mean, there are, I'm sure, many more traditions over the course of human existence that I'm not aware of. But this Ars Moriendi, the sort of art of death, and there's a tradition, centuries old, or traditions, of keeping death proximate as a way to remind you that your time that things are dynamic and in motion, and to not take anything for granted, as a way to get you to appreciate life while you have it. I mean, that's another way of looking at this for me personally. It's another way I've kind of come into this work is I lost some limbs. I came close to death myself. And I realized then that, oh, geez, man, I really love those feet. I really love that arm. Like, wow. Yeah. And I wish I had loved on those things more before they had to go. So, you're saying whether it's a physical reminder, some people have a skull. A lot of old paintings there'll be a skull sitting on someone's desk, or something to keep this proximate, to keep this close, is a way to keep life close and to help you appreciate what you have while you still have it. It's really easy to appreciate something after it's gone, but the idea, I think, is to really love it now. So right. I think that's the gist about the rituals that you're pointing to, and I'm sure there are many such rituals, one way or another.
Sure. And, you're talking about these two sides of the coin of appreciating something while you have it, but on the other side, of course, is loss and grief and the way we deal with loss. And you lost 3 limbs and all the things we lose in life. There seems to be like such meaning and purpose in that. It's kind of like we're saying, if we didn't have death, I mean, in some ways, what would be the point of life? Like, it gives meaning to life. And if we didn't have loss, we wouldn't have grist for the mill. But yet it's so crappy and it hurts so much. And so, sure, appreciating what we have is certainly going to be helpful. But when the loss comes, and certainly the biggest loss, the loss of others who die around us, animals and people, it's so hard, man. It's like, I know I've said this many times where Ram Dass talked about when you're grieving, you're closest to God. And I understand that. And I feel that in my bones. And yet, man, sometimes it feels like impossible, right? The enormity of it. But I also recognize the salve that it is, like the purpose that it plays. It's kind of the point itself, you know.
Amen. And I'm saying amen a lot today. You got me in a
It's what.
spiritual frame. So, but yeah, I mean, I would say, a way forward is appreciate grief, appreciate
Mm,
pain. I remember when I was in the hospital and I work with others who are going through all sorts of pains. And it's very hard, to say to someone who's in pain, say, hey, appreciate your pain. But when those clouds part, even for a moment, and it was just an observation of myself when I felt support and love, it was, I could even appreciate the fact that I could feel pain. Again, I don't want to fetishize. It's not fetishize that. I think we do actually unconsciously, oftentimes, cling to our miseries, hold
yeah, I
on to
do.
our sins. I do
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Maybe that's us being smart on some level to keep that proximate too. There are lots to tease out in there. There's something about honestly holding your reality that will include pain versus latching onto that pain. I think
Wow.
there's probably an important difference there.
How do you think we gain that perspective? You know, I'm guessing there's something there with others. You know, because
Mhm.
you're talking about like just witnessing people, and if you want to feel loved, the easiest way to do that is to love someone else or something else. It's sort of the old
Mhm.
golden rule.
Mhm.
Um, but latching on, man, I felt that in my body when you're talking about sometimes we dig in to our misery in a way.
Mhm.
It's like when you're happy to be angry, even though you know it's
Mhm.
not going well, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
And I wonder grief too. Like, where's that line between indulgence versus
Mhm.
honoring in a way?
Oh, brother, that's such a good question, and one for our times. It's like we're in a corrective. I think we've had, or at least in my own experience, working within a Western healthcare kind of model and
Yeah.
medical model. And, um, you know, there's a backlog. I work with a lot of folks and I see it in myself too, after some period of time of suppressing feelings or, or chasing comforts or shying away from our own pain because we feel like a burden or whatever, all the forces that would conspire to keep pain at bay. At some point, I think there's a wisdom inside of us that knows that that's probably not a great idea. And so I watched myself and others engage after years of living a certain kind of way that's a little bit short sighted, a little immature, come around to finally owning or inhabiting or embodying our pain. And there's almost like a pride in it. Like, no, damn it, I hurt. Listen to me. I hurt. I am. And there's this, there's like this funny, it swings the other way where we almost have to hold on to that pain to make sure we learn from it, that we find our way to be proud to feel it. So there's this you have to hang in there with yourself and others. I think if you find your pendulum swinging between like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. No, I'm not fine. Damn it. No, I'm not fine. Damn
Mm.
it. And there seems to be a period. I wouldn't talk anyone in with some sort of positive attitude too quickly out of letting go of their pain until they're ready. So hang in there with yourself and others for a while longer. And I think the equilibrium will come into play where you realize, no, I don't love my pain. I've just realized I had been, you know, marginalizing it for too long, and now I don't want to do that anymore. And let me love this thing. Let me catch up with myself. Let me catch up with my life, and then I can start letting go. It's rarely conscious, but it can be if you talk it through with folks, and that seems to make a lot of sense. Yeah, let yourself cling to that for a moment if you need to know it, to convince yourself to you know broaden your capacity to feel things. Let that happen, and then eventually you can loosen the knot and let that go too. And I think I know when I'm really humming along, one of my metrics for my own health, my own well-being is, can I get to sorrow and joy equally as easily? Am
Mm.
I in the middle of all these feelings versus trying to just be positive or just be comfortable. And no, I want to be in the middle of all that stuff. It's all real. It all has its place. And so I can tell I'm doing well by myself if I have equal access to joys and sorrows. I mean, just to sort of be a little reductive for a moment, there are all sorts of polarities to play with, but that's a
Yeah.
marker for health for me, and I think it holds up with a lot of people I work with as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really beautiful way of looking at it. I love that idea of access because, of course, it speaks to balance and it speaks to kind of the witness state of seeing it all in a way, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
being too much in one seat or another, sort of like the identities we take on. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as you've witnessed so many people go through a transition process through death, I think everyone likes to think about the wisdom that comes out of it. They want to glean from that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there was a joke in Curb Your Enthusiasm. There was an
Mm-hmm.
episode where they're talking about people who have stage 4 cancer and the wisdom that they have. It's like they have the power, but if you have stage 3, it's like, not as much power. Stage 2, I don't listen to those people, but the stage 4, what do they have to say? I want advice. And so I don't know. Is that Pollyannish of me to think that from your vast experience, I mean, there is some sort of overarching wisdoms that you could just see over and over again that people come to naturally? Or is it just all over the place? Everyone's got their unique path.
I think it's probably more the latter. I think it's all over the place. It's like love or nature or you know potency. I mean, I think life is awesome. Creation is outrageous, and it is everywhere. We have isolated ourselves from nature in all sorts of ways. I think we all realize that one way or another. We're coming around to that it's not man versus nature. That was what I inherited. That was sort of this
Yeah.
funny,
Yeah.
no, that implies that you're not nature. And then that begets all these sort of false divides and these false separations. And so coming back to wholeness, you see, and death does this, or cancer can do this. Illness is really good because that's just nature doing its thing. And it pulls you down to your knees. But the view from when you're on your knees is pretty awesome. It's pretty amazing. And I do think that get on your knees thing is accessible broadly, but we get inured to it through routine or whatever else, or polishing things or whatever else. We accidentally or otherwise separate ourselves from that awesomeness all the time. But when you start retune in, it is everywhere. I believe everywhere. And especially when you start thinking of humans as parts of nature and human nature as part of nature and the things that humans create as, in a sense, nature, then I can look at this lamp, I can look at you through this computer and be friggin' amazed. I mean, that's appropriate. It is outrageous. I don't even know where you are right now. Here we are looking at each other, talking to each other in real time. I'm in St. Louis in my parents' apartment. That's just it's crazy. It's so awesome. But I think the word here is we get easily inured. And sorry, let me just say one more thing. I'm going on a little bit, Krishna, but
No, it's all good.
there's no shame in that in Europe. Of course we do. How can you possibly keep creation
Yeah.
in your in your sights? How can you possibly honor this outrageous fortune all the time? It is very difficult. And one of the squashing forces to the beauty we're talking about is shame, or embarrassment, or so let's
Mm.
not accidentally play into that. It's not shameful that we get inured. We have so much coming at us all the time that just to get through the day, you do need to kind of, or I don't know if you need to, but it makes sense that we partition, that we compartmentalize and all that stuff. There's something adaptive about that just to get through the day. I think that what we're talking about here is getting to some rhythm of attaching and detaching, of focusing in and coming back out, and seeing the forest and seeing the trees, and moving like as a human being with this perspective making capacity. You can, Zoom in and zoom out. You can get particular and get universal. And I'm not saying, I don't think it's one or the other. I think the human endeavor here is to get really facile with that lens. Move in, move out, attach, detach, all of it. It's this rhythm, this motion, this movable feast. Yeah.
And that's a conscious process. I mean, that's, I think of the word practice, or, why people do these sorts of things, because well, on one hand, it is a natural process, very, very much so. But it seems like bringing sort of midwifing that process almost daily, it's going to bring a lot of benefit. The obvious thing I think about, and something we share in common, is our love of Southern Utah. And why? Like, why do you love Southern Utah? I'm guessing it's probably the same reasons I love it, but it feels like it's in line with what we're talking about.
Totally. I mean, I think there's life and death all over the place. I mean, and in the desert it's such a beautiful, compelling gut punch aesthetic that makes this point not as an idea or as a thought or as a word, but as a feeling, a visceral, like, holy Jesus, look at that, feel that, wow, we are of that. You're looking at billions of years of rock. You're looking at these dead trees that are partially dead, and there's like one little twig that's still alive. Well, it just makes this point so dramatically. But I should say, here I am in St. Louis visiting my parents. I was just in a strip mall. And I mean, I think if you're really humming along, you can find awe in a strip mall. Whether it's a blade of grass poking through a sidewalk, or just what humans create, or the destruction itself that we do too, is in a way kind of amazing, has an amazing character. So sometimes I feel a little guilty about my time in Southern Utah, that do I need such an outrageous display to remember these things, to feel these things? Because if I'm really on my game, I should be able to find that feeling just about anywhere. And so, fine. But I sure do love the Southern Utah example and the relationship between time and space out there. And it makes me feel so nice and teeny and itty bitty and small, which is so liberating.
Yeah.
We puff up for so much of the rest of our time. We posture. We need to be bigger. We need to, and I go out there to reset and get itty bitty, get nice and teeny.
It's humble, right? It's very humbling there.
Totally.
And that seems to be a kind of medicine in itself. I mean,
Totally.
Do you find that nature, in a way, it's a presage of death? Like, it's in some ways, it's a kind of salve in showing us of who we are and where we're going.
Yeah. Yes. And this such a determined. You cannot say it's life or death. You have to see it all in the same swirl. It is living. It is dying. It is all of the above all the time. Autumn does a nice job of this. The beauty of leaves turning, they're dying. I mean, so yes, I do think nature makes this point. All we have to do is pay attention to it. But nature is, yes. To answer your question, yes.
Yeah. And how did you end up down there at all? How did it come on your radar? It's funny because I feel like everyone in that town or around there, most of them have some weird story usually about how they ended up there. And I just want to give a shout out to our friend Blake for introducing us. She's been on the podcast, but I'm
Right.
curious.
Hi, Blakey. Hi, Blake and Jen, for me, were a huge part of the draw. But I had, so for me, and I'm with you, it's almost like everyone's got a story out there, an origin story. How the hell did you end up out there? Because you got to go, it's out of the way of just about anything. So, it almost feels sometimes like expatriates. But for me, it was in it's probably 97, right around the time the monument came into being. So I was living in, no, it must have been before that, because I was living in Denver. So that was 95. And I had more time on my hands. I was doing pre-med work and working part-time. And I had a dog at the time, and he and I would get in a car and just go explore in the national parks. I had grown up in the Midwest and been in a school in the East, and so I was just exploring the West. And so I was driving from Denver to Southern California, and I was in Arches National Park, and I was talking to a ranger. And you know how I've come to realize this? You know how it's like, it's really actually a very intimate and question to ask folks for their favorite places out in these woods, because these are deeply personal relationships.
Right.
And especially these days with social media, you put one of these special places on blast to the world, and all of a sudden it's, there's this, it's overrun. So anyway, it's sort of an aside. But here I was asking this ranger, and we seemed to have a nice connection. And I was saying, do you have any favorite little out of the way places or roads? I'm heading, southwest. And she got this look in her eye, Krishna, that was it's not like I knew this person very well at all, but she got this look in her eye that just really took me aback. She just got this twinkle. She said, "Oh, if you have time, you should drive Highway 12 and go over Boulder Mountain. Go to this."
Yeah.
And she just had this look. I'm like, whoa, okay, all right. I got message received. So, we were coming from, from Torrey, from the eastern side, and it was beautiful. Red Rock, it's gorgeous all the way from all over the place. And so then I'm driving to Highway 12, coming up over the Aquarius Plateau, over Boulder Mountain. When you're heading southwest over on Highway 12, there's these moments where the water pocket fold and the Henry Mountains just appear. It's just Jesus. And honestly, so I pulled my car over, my dog and I got out, and we pretty much fell over. I personally had never seen anything like this. And we just walked around. I feel like I may have even shed a tear. I was just bowled over by this landscape. And that sort of top-down view from the mountain looking over this space. So that was it for me. I hit that and then was just in an awe state for the rest of the drive. And then in the latter part of the 90s, I kept kind of finding an excuse to come back there. And then I had this age-old dream for whatever reason. Since the oldest dream I ever had was to have a little piece of land in the middle of wherever, just way out. I don't know where that dream came from, but I was always kind of in the back of my mind, keeping an eye out as I was touring the West for where was this place. And so then late 90s, I kept coming back. And then I finally, maybe early 2000s, I met Blake and Jen at the restaurant, and we fell in love. I mean, as friends, we were, they're just magical people and a magical restaurant they've created. And so then through them, then I heard about a piece of land that had opened up, and then the rest. Off we went.
I have a really similar story, but I mean, for me, I tried to get land there in Boulder I think for maybe 10 years. Everything would always fall through. I could never quite make it to happen. Yet I was always coming back and was very held by the community and the land. So I was always there. It just, it wasn't until not even November that I finally found a spot to be able to buy, but it's on the other side of the mountain, actually.
Towards Torrey or towards Escalante?
Outside Escalante, but up the mountain, basically, So as a crow flies, you just would fly to the other end of the mountains, but you have to drive all the way over to Escalante and then through there.
Up towards the road to Posey Lake. I can't remember what that road is.
That's that Hell's Backbone, right?
Yeah, right.
So
right.
that road, even further to the other end of the mountain, where all those pink cliffs are and stuff. And
yeah.
I mean, same landscape. It's stunning.
Oh yeah, I should go tour around. I've never been back there.
Oh yeah. Well, if we do next time we cross paths, I'd love to show you. It's backcountry land. It's really cool. And Matt Graham, who's been on the show, he's the one who introduced me to that spot. So.
Oh, right on. I don't know Matt. He's a remarkable fellow. I think someone has pointed me towards where he lives. Is it sort of on the way to Antimony or Antimony?
I mean, basically, you're just going after you leave Escalante about a couple miles. After you drive through it, you just head up. There's some roads that go up the mountain.
I know right where you're talking about.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, switching gears a bit, about
Mm,
music, because it's something I think about a lot. And years back, I did some volunteering in hospice when I was living in Portland,
mm,
and I had this I had this idea that I was going to go into hospice and play music for people, which is
mm,
a wonderful idea, but uh, it's funny to me because when I first started, I brought in my whole like live setup, which is like this whole keyboard and it's a lot of stuff. And the hospice folks were really sweet. They're like, "Yeah, okay, sure, give it a go." And I think I had to set it up once in this storage closet because it was so like big. And I was like, "Well, they'll bring the person to me." And I was working with this gentleman, this First Nations gentleman, or just meeting with him, and Chris. And the day I came and I set it all up, and I'm like, I'm sure in my mind I thought like, I'm gonna blow this guy's mind, and then I was waiting for him, and he never showed up. He ghosted me, and I think they told me like, he's not up for it today.
mm,
And of course, I was crestfallen,
mm,
and but it was a big lesson for me, and I realized, this isn't about me. First off, and second off, you can't have an agenda in hospice. And I
mm,
had to learn that the hard way. And after
mm,
that, I would just come and mostly just sit with someone once or twice a week and hang out for a little bit.
mm,
And I had like a little flute, and maybe I'd play a little flute if they wanted it for like a minute or two.
mm,
And that was the music part. And it's mostly just being with folks. And I would just be like, whatever they need or don't need, or that's fine.
mm,
So let's talk about like agendas and maybe, or like,
mm,
what is needed in hospice or not needed, and just how that might teach us about what's needed and not needed in general.
mm. Ah, that's beautiful, man. Yeah. What a, I'm sorry for your pain that day, but
Oh,
what
come
a
on, man. I
beautiful,
mean, my little ego, you
I
know.
know. Well, but it's sort of kind of sweet, and it's so understandable and so important that you took the lesson. I mean, that is one of the things I think a lot of us get really drawn to in this work is exactly that process of kind of being shaken down, and it just really puts things in perspective. And it, by force or by choice, it allows, we have to settle into what is, as they say. And you settled into the very simple magic of it is just being with someone, really, really being with them. And it doesn't matter, you know, what you talk about necessarily, or what music, or if any is played. It's just those are, those can be catalyzing tools in a way. But I think the magic, well, magic makes it sound more mysterious than it is. I don't know that it's magic. It's just very simple. Just being with someone in space and time without an agenda, and moving together for a moment. I think that's it. It's that simple and that hard. You know,
Yeah, that may be like the greatest gift we can give to anyone at any time.
I
Perhaps
I
it's like
I,
far simpler than we think, and far more powerful than we give credence to.
I agree. I totally agree with that. And it's on both parties. You have to receive that yourself as well as participate in it. So, you know, I'm always fascinated how people can be bored in this world, because how can you be bored even just sitting there, actually? Because then you're down to this nub, this irreducible nub of presence and accompaniment, and that is such an inspiring conclusion that's it. you know like
Yeah,
and it's that accessible, and yet we so often blow past it. We can't receive that kind of presence, or participate in it in ourselves. It's for some reason our nervous systems are just all jacked up. So, but anyway, I do think that is part of the big lesson, and it's relevant anywhere along the way. And back to what we were saying earlier, in that state, that is a state, appreciation and love flow pretty quickly and easily from that zone.
mm,
Um, so,
yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah, just a little more about music. Like in that time period, I released these records, these little sister records. One's music to be born to, and music to die to.
Mm,
And I didn't actually see the music as different.
mm,
To truth be told, I was like, it's just the same energy to me. And the
mm,
music to be born to one, I've heard many stories that I'm so honored that people are like, we actually use the music for our birth of our child. I'm like, wow, that's incredible.
Mm.
I've only heard a few stories of people say like we use the music for dying, and I'll also be honest, that was the one I was more interested in. It
Mm.
was like how music can play a role in this process,
Mm.
because I see it happening with psychedelics and all sorts of psychedelic therapies and meditation, and not that different in a lot of ways about letting go and psychological things with your ego. I guess don't technically know what's going on with death, so maybe I'm assuming that. But do you think music there's maybe as a tool, like one of the things we can use, music therapy and music in the process of dying, is something we have yet to fully unlock, or do you hopeful for that, or what do you think?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, yes, with the capital Y. Yeah, yes, yes,
Amen.
yes, yes. Amen. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I've witnessed it. There is I'm sure you know, music. You can study music thanatology. There is a
Yeah, I
way,
thought
and
about that. Yeah.
it's I don't pretend to know the details of it, but it's to your point here. Music, I think most people agree across culture, across time, music is there's something about music. I don't know what.
That's
I don't
magic
know.
to me. When you want to
It's
talk about
just
magic, it's like
yeah.
I don't. It has magical qualities of being able to cross dimensional spaces and emotion and trans language, and it's incredible.
Absolutely. It is. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm resisting there's a piece of me wants to put it in the hierarchy and say it is the best. It is the most. It is the most
Well,
powerful or whatever else.
I'll take that.
But
Let's do that.
yeah, I mean, so God, it really has my vote. I mean, in my own personal experience and what I've seen at the bedside. I was at a hospice house visiting in outside of Chicago. It was in a not a house. It was in a ward in a hospital. You know, an an anesthetic environment. And there was a woman there with a harp, and she was keying into the patient's respiratory rate, the patient's pulse, and she was picking up those rhythms and playing into those rhythms. And in a way, she caught this man. She held him with the music, and I don't know who was leading who. It doesn't really matter. They were in this resonant space. It was so friggin' gorgeous. I almost just fell out of my shoes. I mean, it was just stunning. And you could see the effect on this man's face. His countenance changed. I don't even know if I don't recall whether he was asleep or awake, conscious or not. It doesn't necessarily even really matter. There's all sorts of things going on in folks who look asleep at the end of life. So, yeah, I've seen it. I
Wow.
feel it myself in my own life. It's the one thing that's gone across my whole life that has always been potent. Um, and I think so. Yes, to music, and I also think, and perhaps like we're saying, maybe music is a pinnacle of something else, which for me is the aesthetic plane, the world of perception of our feelings. And to me, that's what's so powerful about having a body. It feels things. Intellect's cool, and the intellect's fascinating, but it's not the bottom line as far as I can see. Even when our intellects are gone, our memory's gone, you can still feel things. Music can transport people who otherwise look locked in. I've seen that too. There's actually a
Yeah.
film about that. I bet you've seen. I can't remember the name of
Yeah.
it.
The Robin
Alive.
Williams,
Another one
older
called
one.
the newer one, a documentary called Alive Inside.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So there's some beautiful moments there where guys in nursing homes who look completely shut in, all of a
Yeah.
sudden music starts up and they remember the lyrics and their
Yeah.
eyes, everything changes. But yes, music, but pulling out a little bit, I would say this aesthetic domain is where it's really at. And another reason I think we love our Southern Utah, that is an aesthetic experience. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, you don't need words. You don't need much time. It's an immediate, and especially if your number of minutes are winding down on the planet, anything that and anything with immediacy, anything that doesn't require you weaving together a story in words and blah blah blah. When you're down to the nub of your body's existence, that's seems to me that's where the bottom line is, and it's a beautiful bottom line. So I really want to see what can be done in end of life care. You mentioned earlier, Krishna, about what can we learn from hospice? Well, one thing I've seen is this environment of care matters so much for all the reasons I think we're saying now. The means and the ends come together there, and it's really beautiful.
Well, I do think that any of the tools that are being made or just that I'm making for psychedelic therapy use, these long form instrumental, like all of the aspects musically that I'm bringing into those pieces to help guide a journey, I
Mm,
know would work very well with end of life care too. I think the
mm,
same music would work in the same way to play for people to be used in a sense to help guide their process just with emotion and the aesthetic
mm,
qualities. And I look forward to like not everyone might do a psychedelic journey, but everyone goes through death. So it's like if anything, there's a bigger market there. It's like there's more service to be done. And I perhaps it's my own selfishness in that I want to help other people have less suffering with death because I have my own fears about my own suffering with death. And so it's sort of a laboratory. I'm like, does this help? Let's
mm,
let's let's see what helps.
mm, mm,
The music thanatology stuff that you're talking about, I mean, talk about a dance. I mean, my understanding of it was just that you learned the musical things, but you also learned about medical things like how to watch and monitor breathing and heart rates to respond in real time with the music.
mm,
One of the things, and that's something that I do when I'm playing music live in guiding journeys,
mm,
but when those journeys are recorded and then someone's using that recording in a session, you would say, well, it's not live. But nonetheless, when you're in that space, you feel all these synchronistic alignments of how the music is meeting your moment.
mm,
And that speaks a little bit to this idea of synchronicity as an ingredient in life. Dare I say, the numinous, the unseen. And
mm,
I'm curious what role that plays for you. I mean, you're inside dancing between the world of medicine that is very materialistic in a sense, but also
mm,
the palliative care that to me maybe is the most numinous besides uh,
mm,
bringing babies into the world.
mm,
So it's more of
mm,
a personal question in a sense.
mm. Well, sorry, buddy. I was enthralled with what you were saying. What
Well,
was the question?
kind of about synchronicity
Mhm.
and sort of the unseen or the spiritual
Mm.
aspects of it, and
Oh yeah.
does that like I could ask you how that plays a role in when people are dying, but really just for you in general, because I know all the things you've gone through. I look at your life and I see such meaning and almost design in a way. That's
Mm,
just my own
mm,
story that I put onto it, but I'm curious
mm,
what you find in it.
mm. Well, a couple of thoughts, man. Yeah. So, yes, another thing I love about end of life work, um, and that is like directly like something we should pull into all of life. One of the lessons you glean from dealing with death and that's pan relevant is it forces you into some relationship with the unknown. I mean, and this is why I kind of like my medical
Yeah.
training because I know a lot about physiology and all that stuff, and the science of life. Um, and as much as is known about the science of life, it, you one way or another, you will learn that you just even that doesn't know it. Even that isn't enough to explain everything. There is just you cannot honestly be around this stuff for very long and pretend you know it all or understand it all, like
Right.
intellectually. You can know it in your bones, kind of thing. But so yes, so it does pull you into this relationship with mystery, with not knowing, and early on in my own work life or life in the culture of medicine, not knowing was a failure. That seemed like uh, ignorance or laziness or something. Until I met folks, and that was true enough for me. I was, I could have worked harder or whatever. I could have studied more, but until you meet some of these guys who actually do pretty much know all there is to know, in the medical world, and then you see them, those guys, when they tell you, no, I don't know everything. There's all sorts of stuff I can't explain. Well, then I can finally relax into my not knowing as not being something of necessarily a marker of my ignorance, but a marker of, wow, life is so much bigger than we can comprehend. And how friggin' awesome is that? That is not a failing. So then all of a sudden, that changed the dynamic of my relationship to the unknown. Um, and uncertainty can be terrifying, but it can be also liberating and gorgeous, and that's where curiosity comes from. There's a humility in that. There's all sorts of beauty. So it's like the night sky. Look up in the night sky. It's just nuts. And do I understand it? No. Can I explain it? Hell no. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean I can't be bowled over by it. And like we were saying earlier, there's this benevolent neutrality. I am an agnostic person. I don't pretend to know whether or not there's a God.
Yeah.
But I do feel like, everything I see, there does feel like a benevolent spin on it. And I don't think I'm just projecting because I want there to be. But maybe because creation is procreative, that feels sort of positive, and you get a sense how life continues even as this life, your life, my life ends. That is so clearly not the end, even of our bodies, and so you start looking at these things in detail, and all of a sudden the world cracks open to you, and it kind of right sizes us. I don't need to know everything to participate in it or to feel part of it. That's just, heck no. And part of the way I participate is not knowing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know where I was going with all that. But there you go.
The unknown, and I've heard you talk about how your comfort and love of the unknown, and I don't know why that shocked me, but it's like, for some reason I never thought of that as like something positive in a way. But in what you're saying, I recognize that you choose these things. It's not really a belief, and of course you do. And that's okay. It's like it's okay to choose to see the benevolence. In some ways, that's needed for you to make those choices, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Yes, and it's like it makes me feel the same way I feel about illusion. Like illusion, a lot of spiritual talk. Like illusion sounds like a problem. Like we're just deluding ourselves. That's not real. That's an illusion. Or I don't think there's any problem with an illusion. I don't. Just call it an illusion. Just call it like you just did. Like call it a choice. That's fine. I choose that. I choose to key into that benevolent spin. And that's okay. Can I prove it? Can I, do I believe that is the whole truth, nothing but the truth, there is no other truth? No, I can't say that. But I can own it as a choice I make to help me move through life and to stay engaged and stay loving it. So yeah, amen. Just call it what it is and still do it. I can love my illusions. I love my neuroses. I love people with neuroses. I mean, speaking of boring, what's non-neurotic people are not that interesting to be around. We have our idiosyncrasies and our little weirdisms, and that's great. Let's love them. Don't confuse them with some fuller truth. That's where the trouble comes in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour. I want to honor your time. I mean, do you have time for another little riff or two here, or where are you at?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. Well, that kind of makes me think about isolation, because that's something that a lot of people feel so much today, and it's somewhat a symptom probably of like our digital lives, social media. But didn't you talk about like this idea of it almost being like a common bond? And I was kind of not scratching my head, but I was like, wow, that's sort of like the things we look at that are hard for us or push us away or make us feel so separate. But in some ways, they actually bring us together because we all feel that in a way.
Yeah. It's like this. Yes. Yeah. I love this stuff. It's sort of like this next sort of second order thinking or next level thinking or kind of a meta thing.
Right.
Here, and it came obvious to me when I was working in a cancer center in San Francisco, UCSF, for many years. And, and it's kind of a standard clinical setting. And kind of sort of like a factory. I'd sit in this little teeny room and one person after another would come in from the waiting room and we would have our time together. And almost invariably, a lot of people in the throes of big illness or near the end of life would have some experience of feeling isolated or alone. And sitting there like, God, you were just sitting in the lobby next to someone who feels exactly the same way. We are sharing this experience of loneliness. We are sharing this experience that feels unshareable. And if you just pull back on that lens a moment, you can see that has at least the potential to be a bond. When I find myself feeling so alone in this world and no one gets me and no one understands me, one of the things that pulls me out of that tailspin is to say, I bet a lot of people feel that way. And then all of a sudden I have a line of connection to those people who feel disconnected. So yes, and it only gets confusing because the rhetoric gets confusing. Reality will show us this all the time. And all of a sudden in this way, again, back to being pieces of nature. Nature uses everything. So we should use everything. I should use that sense of isolation. There is a connection into that too.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. My grandmother, when she passed away, almost 100 years old, and she was someone who was very stoic and very like introspective and dealt with all sorts of meditation techniques and yoga. And I think my mother had this expectation that like when she passed, it would be the same, like, because she had all this toolkit. And I would imagine death is messy because I think it kind of was quite stoic, but there was moments, of course, from my point of view, that were confusion and fear. And I think at one point my grandmother had said something while she was actively dying about kind of like, help me, or I'm so afraid, that kind of thing, which is heart-wrenching to hear. But in some ways it nullified for my mother, like, oh, man, she didn't, that's what it was in a sense, like, and that's now the story in a way. And I'm like, Mom, if I've seen anything from psychedelics, it's like all sorts of stuff happens. And that doesn't mean that's not the totality of the journey at all. Just on the face of it, sometimes we see things happening and then the person reports back a completely different story. There's that too. But it's sort of like dreams we have or something. But so I'm guessing death is messy and definitely not linear, and we need to allow, it's the fullness of our human experience, I would imagine. Yes. And there's, I'm sure, a lesson in that.
Hugely. And this is, again, let's be careful with our language, including to be clear that language just can't get everything quite right. There just aren't words for some of these things, So you're bringing up thank you for sharing that personal example, Christian, because it's a really important one. There's a difference between beauty and pretty, and I think there's a problem if we pursue comfort as an end of itself, or if we get too attached to this notion of peace. The person was at peace and they looked peaceful and was calm, and he didn't fight their death, and that's supposed to. I think we kind of assume that's somehow that's the pinnacle. No, and that's great if that. You go that way? Sure, great. I'm not against peace. But the truth is, it's sort of like, how beauty and terror are right next to each other? Like big beauty. Like they're totally, at least in my, like back to Utah, that's not a coddling landscape. It's not an easy place. So there is, I think what death is asking us is to have a bigger cauldron. Have a bigger idea of your grandmother's, the fullness of her experience. And isn't it even more powerful that she could know fear, she could be afraid, and she could be those other things too. Just because she had fear in those moments didn't mean she was only afraid or that it didn't nullify the rest of our life. Life is bigger than that. Life is bigger than tidiness or prettiness or comfort. And that's the bigger lesson here. So I think a lot of times well-intended folks kind of latch onto this notion of peacefulness, ease, blah, blah, blah. That's not, as far as I've ever seen, that's not really the point. Um, so I think, yeah, let's give your grandmother full props. She was a real full human being
Yeah.
and a living thing. And life is terrifying sometimes.
Yeah.
This is death. So does that kind of register with you, Christian, as you think about
Yeah.
her?
So many analogs in these discussions around death, about life, which I'm sure is why you like this stuff too. And I just think about Boulder, and it's like that's what makes the landscape of southern Utah is that death is so close there. On the
Mm-hmm.
just like, oh, there's a cliff or you see it, but also you see it around you and the weather. It's like you're actually not quite as safe. I mean, you probably are, but you sometimes feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's right there with you, and that brings a kind of aliveness. Like I feel more alive down there because of that. I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
reason, and it's showing me and reminding me right now that the more I am with death in my consciousness, it actually brings the gift of aliveness to the present moment,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is maybe that's why I can understand why you spent so much time in this field and dedicated your life to it. And I think about like all the ways that I think about it a lot, and I'm like, well, maybe it's not that far off from the aesthetics that I spend all my time in. It's actually all one thing. That's another way of reminding ourselves about life and death and meaning.
You got it. Yeah, that's got my vote, brother. Yeah,
Mm.
you speak my mind, as the Quakers say. Yeah, yes, yeah.
Is there any? I feel pretty resolved here. I have more that we could go into, but I also like to sense the natural flow of the conversation. Maybe I'll ask one more thing. Heard something I heard you say that I thought was really beautiful, about life beyond the story,
Mm.
and maybe I'll just let you speak to that, and we'll make a
Mm.
closing.
Yeah, I just think it's a little reminds me of what you were relating with your mom and your grandmother there. The stories that we have of ourselves or of life. And we can love stories, but part of loving the story is seeing them as the inventions that they are, because they can be so reductive. I love watching people. Uh, stories can help and stories can hurt. Back to kind of grasping our miseries and things like that. Um, I think the trouble comes if, again, stories are beautiful, just don't confuse them with the fuller truth, and hold your stories lightly, rewrite them, write new ones. We give ourselves these narratives as a way into grasping life because it's so huge, and as a tool, they're powerful and awesome. And there's so much to story, and I'm not in any way denigrating story. It's just like I want to have a world view that's bigger than any one story could ever get at. So yes, have your stories, love your stories, but rewrite them, know them as a story. Those are stories are linked to intellect, to memory, to words, and they tend to be linear when we like them. They have a beginning, middle, and end. Great, but that's a dramatically reductive enterprise. So, like we can say, we can love our neuroses, love our idiosyncrasies, love our stories, but somewhere be bigger than the story, or at least see beyond the story. Then you'll be seeing, as far as I can tell, a fuller, richer life that contains practically infinite numbers of stories.
Well, BJ, thank you so much for your time. I'm so happy we got some time to get to know each other a little bit, but I look forward
Me
to
too.
more, and I'm glad we could share this with everybody else.
Thank you, Krishna. Man, it's such a joy talking to you. Just made my day. I was all in sort of task oriented to do list all morning, and I got a more to do list this afternoon. But thanks for pulling my head out of the sand a little bit and pulling back on the lens. And it's such a gorgeous, gorgeous time being with you. It reminds me of like I'm doing this thing too. I'm not just talking about other people. I'm engaged in this myself, and I just love my time with you, Christian. I can't wait to see you out in Boulder.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you to your sweet pup in the background for giving us the lesson without saying a word. It's like just
she
rest.
knows
Yeah.
exactly. She's not holding herself to anyone's story. That's for sure.
That's for sure. And if people want to connect with you or your work even more, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, come visit us at Metal Health, this little organization my partner Sonia and I are trying to build as we speak. Metal, METTLE, metalhealth.com is our little website. That's where we counsel and coach and be with people. And then I think we're on Instagram at Metal Health. You'll see pictures of Maisie. We do dog
Awesome.
magazine covers of Maisie on our Instagram, Metal Health. Or I am on Twitter, but I never look at it, at BJ Miller MD, I think it is. And then there's our book, A Beginner's Guide to the End, put out by Simon & Schuster a few years ago. So those are some of the ways to get in here if you'd like.
Right on. I'll put some of that in the show notes, and hope you have a great day. Thank you.
You too, Krishna. Thank you so much, buddy.
Thanks, BJ, for taking the time to connect. It really meant a lot to me. I hope we can do it again, and I really hope we can connect in person down there in our favorite landscape of southern Utah. Maybe get out there on the land together. There's nothing like it. Definitely check out BJ's talks. He's so many other cool podcasts, and his book is fantastic. A lot of practical wisdom and advice about preparing for death, but also how that can bring a lot more meaning to life. So check out those links in the show notes. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Inside, and it is from the album Music to Die To, which we were talking about there in the episode. That's wherever you listen to music, and it's from a long time ago. I'm trying to think, it was 2015 perhaps, but there's a sweetness to it even today. And as I was saying, I think any of the music like this that's from the ceremonies, it works for psychedelic guidance. It works for bringing babies into the world. It works for bringing us out of the world too. It's just really music for the living in that sense. So I hope you enjoy it. You guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do, you know what to do. Just do it with grace.